This week on Let's Talk About Mental Health, I'm talking about accountability. How taking accountability for your words and actions can improve your mental health and well-being. So, let's get talking. This is Let's Talk About Mental Health, a weekly podcast about mental health and well-being, hosted by Jeremy Godwin. Let's talk about mental health, because the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk About Mental Health, the weekly podcast full of practical advice for improving and maintaining your mental health and well-being. I'm Jeremy Godwin, thank you for joining me. This week is episode 16 of Let's Talk About Mental Health, and the topic is Let's Talk About Accountability. Today I'll be talking about the importance of taking accountability of your words and actions for the sake of your mental health and well-being, and I'll be discussing how accountability and self-improvement go hand in hand. So, let's talk. Have you ever found yourself watching the news and you might have started rolling your eyes when a politician came on and blamed a whole bunch of issues on the party that was in power before them, rather than talking about what they're going to do to rectify the situation here in the present? Or is there someone that you know who has a habit of blaming everyone around them for their problems, rather than being honest about what their part is in whatever the issue is? Accountability is a fundamental part of good mental health and well-being, because it's about taking ownership of your self-development by understanding and working through the things that you have direct control over, and making the conscious decision to do better every day. So today I'm going to be talking about what personal accountability is, why it matters if you're serious about your mental health, and different things that you can do every day, no matter how small, to help you to build a stronger sense of personal responsibility for the things that happen in your life. So what is accountability and why does it matter? Let me ask you a question, and I want you to be completely honest with yourself. When things go wrong in your life, do you blame everyone around you automatically, or do you look for what your part in the situation was? There's a big difference between blame and personal accountability, and it's a delicate subject because sometimes in life horrible things happen to us that we have no control over. However, all too often there are things that happen that we can control, whether directly or indirectly, and instead of seeking to control them, or manage them or work through them, we look to assign blame, rather than taking accountability for our part in whatever happened. And that's what we're talking about in this episode, how a mindset of accountability can help you to take greater ownership of your overall mental health and well-being. Let me tell you a little story. I love travel, and one of the accounts that I follow on Instagram is The Points Guy, and I also follow its UK offshoot, The Points Guy UK, because I love their YouTube videos. Anyway, a few weeks ago, they reposted a customer service conversation between a passenger and British Airways that had gone viral on Twitter. Now, I'll post the link in this week's transcript, but to cut a long story short, a passenger had complained on Twitter because the airline had refused to let her on her flight because her new passport hadn't been signed. It's a legal requirement, and she put the weight of the problem on British Airways because now she was complaining that she had signed her passport really quickly in the airport with a rushed signature that didn't look like her real signature. Now, I'm sharing this story because the airline's response was pretty blunt. Angela from British Airways responded on social media and said, and I quote, "I'm sorry you felt embarrassed at how my colleague dealt with you. However, there are times when we have to accept responsibility for our own actions. If you had signed your passport when you received it, this wouldn't have become an issue." Now, for many of you who are raised on the whole "the customer is always right" mindset, you might be feeling slightly horrified, but bear in mind that the British, along with we Australians, do tend to be fairly blunt and direct about things. And quite frankly, Angela was 100% spot on. The customer was clearly embarrassed about what had happened and reacted by externalizing the blame. But nobody else was responsible for what happened but herself. We all make mistakes from time to time, but when our actions or inactions cause issues, we have two choices. We can either blame others and turn it into something bigger than it is, or we can take accountability and rectify it so that we can get on with our lives. There was another social media post that was floating around a little while ago saying, did you have a bad day, or was it just a bad 5 minutes that you turned into an entire bad day? And I think that really reinforces just how much we can tend to turn small issues into bigger issues if we don't take accountability and work through them. Now, before we go any further today, let me be really clear about one thing here. As I said, sometimes things happen to us that are completely out of our control, like having physical or emotional harm inflicted on us by other people. And by no means am I blaming victims of those sorts of serious issues. I have been on the receiving end of physical and emotional abuse as a child, and I know all too well that there are times that we are powerless to stop things being done to us. In those circumstances, I strongly believe professional help is absolutely necessary to work through the trauma, and it's not just a case of sticking on a podcast and being done with it. So that's not what I'm discussing this week. What I am talking about is where we might blame others for things that we did or said, or perhaps we might minimize what we did or said, or we might even ignore our actions and the consequences that our actions have entirely. Accountability is about taking ownership for the things that you say and do, and the effects that they have on others. It's about developing a level of emotional maturity where you understand that taking ownership of the role you play in events will lead you to freedom and will help you to stop being controlled by the circumstances that might be around you. If you ever find yourself in a messy situation, chances are it's a series of decisions and actions that led you to that place. Each choice you make, each word you utter, each action you take, they all send you down a path to one of countless possible futures. For example, if you choose to avoid doing work that needs to be done, then what follows will be a different set of outcomes than if you had completed whatever needed to be done at the time. You have direct control over what you do, say, and feel. And now that last bit, the feel bit, is the most difficult to control, and it takes a lot of time and effort to not let our emotions control us. And when you work out how to do it 100% of the time, please let me know. But often we blame the words and actions of others for what we do say and feel. In the most recent Mental Health Talk newsletter that I just sent out last Friday, that was issue 15, I shared a link to a TEDx talk by Dr. Alan Watkins, who noted that we often say things like, "You made me angry," when in fact, nobody can actually make you feel anger. Rather, it is you choosing to be angry. Whether you do that consciously or subconsciously often depends on the situation and even the person. We might find it more challenging to manage those emotional responses when it's someone that we're very close with, like a partner or a parent or a child. But still, nobody can make you feel something without your permission, and your reaction is entirely your choice. You are responsible for your words and actions, and what you do or say, or don't do or don't say, that will directly determine what happens next. I think this can be one of the more challenging aspects for us to wrap our heads around fully, because we are, as human beings, we're hardwired to think highly of ourselves, and being confronted with the reality that the things that you have done, have said, and have felt are directly responsible for shaping your world is a bit of a slap in the face. But that doesn't mean that it's not true. Just because you don't like the message, that doesn't make it wrong. One of the reasons why we can have such a tough time with the concept of accountability is because we tend to differentiate between our intentions and our behaviours. How many times have you found yourself thinking, or even saying to someone else, "I didn't mean anything by it"? And how infuriating is it when someone has hurt your feelings, but they dismiss it by saying, "I didn't mean to hurt you"? Okay, that's great. You might not have meant to, but the result is still the same, and it won't change what has happened. What does change things is taking accountability. Think of it this way. If someone said or did something hurtful and you brought it to their attention, what would feel better by way of response? If they said, "Well, I didn't do it on purpose," or if they said, "I'm sorry I made you feel that way." We naturally get defensive, especially when we didn't intend to say or do something hurtful. But regardless of whether you intended it or not, the outcome is still the outcome. So rather than making it worse by denying any accountability, instead, why not take ownership and resolve to learn from it? That is maturity, and that is a positive mindset, both of which contribute to good mental health. Can you imagine what our world would be like if politicians stopped making excuses or defending themselves when they did something wrong, and instead were accountable and willing to learn from their mistakes? We had a really big example of this recently with the bushfires that happened here in Australia when they were at their worst over the whole New Year's period. Our Prime Minister was away overseas on holidays with his family, as was the head of emergency services here in New South Wales, which is the state that I live in, and it's the state that has been the worst affected in terms of land size. They were both criticised in the media and by the public for going away in what was already a dangerous time. We've been in crisis mode since October here with severe heat waves, and it's happened a couple of months earlier than normal with bushfire season kicking in, and it's definitely not an ordinary event. But anyway, they were both criticised for not coming back immediately when the fires were spreading out of control. And then finally, they both cut their holidays short and came back. Now, whilst our Prime Minister decided to fight back against public opinion and made every excuse under the sun for why he hadn't actually done anything wrong, which of course made the public and the media come for him even harder, the other guy simply said, "I made a mistake. I should have come back earlier, but I didn't, and I'm sorry." Then he got on and did the job that he needed to do. Either way, neither of them can change what they did, but they can take accountability and they can learn from it, rather than making it all about why everyone else is in the wrong because they didn't intend to do anything that caused harm. Whether you intend the consequences of your actions or not is irrelevant. It's the impact they have that you are responsible for. So let's talk for a minute about how accountability affects your mental health and well-being. Accountability and personal responsibility goes hand in hand with self-development and personal growth, because it's about taking ownership of those things that we have direct control over: our actions, our words, and our feelings. Taking responsibility for things, without excuse or qualification, presents an opportunity to grow, because it means you are less controlled by what's happening outside of you and more by what's going on inside. In psychology, this is called locus of control. Having an external locus of control means that you believe that your life is controlled by external forces as opposed to an internal locus of control, which is where you believe that you have control over what happens in your life. They are two very different mindsets, and an external locus of control can sometimes be accompanied by blaming others for problems or feeling like a victim of circumstance. You are never a victim unless you choose to be, even if terrible things happen to you that are completely out of your control, because you always have a choice in terms of how you respond. The notion of choice is one that I talk about a lot, and it's a topic that I'll be doing a whole episode on later this year, because it's such a fundamental part of good mental health and well-being. One of the biggest things that has influenced my thinking on this, and which helped me to reframe things while I was working through my own depression and anxiety, is the work of Dr. Viktor Frankl. If you're not familiar with him, Dr. Frankl was a psychiatrist and neurologist from Austria who was Jewish, and he was interred in a concentration camp during World War II. Dr. Frankl chose to use his experiences during the Holocaust to write Man's Search for Meaning, which was released in 1946 and is considered to be one of the greatest books of the 20th century, having sold well over 100 million copies. In it, he focuses a lot on choice, the power to choose as being the most fundamental aspect of our humanity. Let me share a quote that demonstrates what I mean. "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms: to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Let me repeat that. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms: to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Now, let's be very clear that this doesn't mean that people in the concentration camps could just choose to be happy and everything would be great. Far from it. And we know that many, many millions died in the Holocaust. But there is a fundamental, inalienable truth to Dr. Frankl's words. We always have the power to choose our attitude in any set of circumstances, and we can always choose our own way, even in the face of death. Even if that way is to simply accept our circumstances as they are, that choice is still ours. Nobody can force it, no matter what they do to us, because the power is internal. The power is always ours. You are not your circumstances. You are not what has or hasn't happened to you. You are your choices. You are your words and your deeds, and you're never going to be perfect 100% of the time because nobody is perfect, even if they might think that they are. But the closest we can come to perfection is being willing to learn, being willing to grow, willing to be the very best version of ourselves that we can be. And we do that by being fully accountable, by taking personal responsibility for the things that we have direct control over, our words, our actions, and our feelings. So, how do you do that? How do you increase your personal accountability? Let's get into the good stuff, the how-to. Let's talk through some specific points to help you increase your personal accountability a little bit each day, because like anything, it takes time and practice, and the more you do it, the easier it will become. First of all, self-assessment. How accountable are you now, really? How often do you blame external factors for things that you do? I get annoyed with my partner when something happens that isn't the way I want it to happen, and I find that I have to remind myself that I'm choosing to get annoyed about something that's out of my direct control. What other people do or say is up to them, just as it's up to each of us what we choose to do with other people's words or actions. If you find that you're often controlled by what other people do or don't do, then this is the moment for you to decide that enough is enough and take back your control. Because when you start to focus on what is within your control, then you are taking steps towards good and lasting mental health and well-being. Because you will, over time, become less affected by what other people do or don't do, or what they say or don't say. And that takes time and effort. And I'll walk you through some more steps to guide you on that path. But the first piece is around really identifying how accountable you are now, really. So next is understanding. Once you have a clear idea of where you are today in terms of accountability, now you need to ask yourself, why are things that way? What has happened or hasn't happened in your past that has shaped the way you are? You'll hear me say in pretty much every episode that it's really important to dig deep and understand the core of why things are the way they are. Why do I say that? Because you need to understand what the root cause of something is in order to effectively address it. If you're carrying around baggage from your past, this is the time to process it fully. You must make your peace with the things that have happened and the things that are out of your control before you can hope to move forward without constantly looking back over your shoulder at the stuff that's happened in the past. I talked about baggage and how to work through it in episode 7, and I highly recommend you either listen to or read that episode. I'll put the link in the transcript, or you can just head over to letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au and you'll find it under the episodes tab. Understanding is key because it helps you to work out where you need to focus your attention. Next, let go of what you need to let go of. Again, this is something that I talked about a lot in episode 7, baggage, and also episode 4, overthinking, and episode 9, self-talk. What has happened has happened. All you can do is acknowledge it, take responsibility for it, rectify it, and then most importantly, learn from it and ensure it doesn't happen again, even if it's just something that you did to yourself. If you're carrying stuff around from the past, work through it and then let it go, because it's not going to do you any good now or in the future. Don't look backwards because you're not going that way. Eyes forward. Once you've focused on letting go and you've worked through that stuff, and again, listen to those previous episodes for more specific advice on working through that, it's now time to consider a few questions about where you are now. And the questions are, what changes need to happen in your life now? What do you need to do more of? What do you need to do less of? And what choices do you need to make and remake every single day? Let's go back to the example of blaming others. If you're prone to pointing the finger then you need to seriously think about what that says about you as a person. One of my old bosses would always say to us, when you point the finger at someone else, remember that there are 3 fingers pointing back at you. And that serves to remind each of us that we often point the finger because, consciously or subconsciously, it says something about some element of ourselves that we may not like. Or it makes us realize that in any situation, we have ownership for what we take on board or what we don't take on board. A commitment to making personal accountability a fundamental aspect of your life requires us to confront ourselves and to identify what needs to change in our lives so that we can be healthier in mind, body, and spirit. Let me give you another example which might seem a bit extreme: substance abuse. Now, the simple way to think about substance abuse is just say no, but that didn't work back in the 80s and it's not going to work now. If people abuse substances of any kind, alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, etc., they're doing so because of both choice and biological drivers. Now, it's not possible to just pop a pill and stop any kind of addiction. And frankly, I don't think it ever will be, because getting through that sort of thing requires you to want to change. I quit smoking for good in 2013, but it certainly wasn't the first time I had attempted it. I think I tried about 4 or 5 times before, but I was never fully committed to it before that. Once I took accountability and made the choice to change, I began to change. Now, I'm not saying that just choosing to stop any sort of behavior will do the trick, because it won't. It takes a lot of work, it takes time, and especially in the case of substance abuse, it takes professional support. But it all starts with taking personal responsibility and making the decision to change. Blame, negative thinking, attachment to stuff that's bad for us, or people or relationships that are bad for us. These are all choices, whether conscious or subconscious. If you stick around in a friendship or a relationship that is one-sided or not supportive, you are choosing an action that is bad for your mental health. There might be 1,000 different excuses why you want to stick around, but they're all just excuses. Because deep down, somewhere in your core, in your heart of hearts, you have to know that whatever it is not in your best interests. Does that make sense? Every situation is different, and I'm generalizing here, but every situation that you're in is a choice. And accepting that fact is a mindset that can serve to make you look at your choices and your entire life in a totally different light. Now, that doesn't mean that you're directly responsible for everything that happens to you. For example, if you get sick or you have an accident or someone does something terrible to you physically or emotionally, these things are often completely out of our control. But what you are accountable for is what you do next. Do you let the situation reduce you, control you, take over your life? Or do you take control? If you're experiencing mental illness, do you let it own you? Do you stay at home and refuse to seek any kind of help and then complain about why nothing is changing? Or do you take the first step and go and see a doctor? Or do you phone a helpline and talk to someone? Or do you decide to consult with a therapist, either in person or online? You are accountable for the mindset you choose. And the mindset you choose will directly affect the world around you. End of sentence. If you choose to be positive, you will slowly start to see more and more positive, and you'll be better equipped to deal with the inevitable crappy stuff that happens and which is out of your control. Take steps every single day to choose thoughts, feelings, and actions that are positive. What it all boils down to is this: personal accountability is a fundamental aspect of good mental health and well-being, because it reminds us that the things we do, the things we say, and the things we feel are all in our direct control, and they are all that we have direct control over. Which might sound a bit depressing, but actually it's liberating, because once you fully accept that it is you who shapes your world, and all that it takes is to be mindful of your feelings, words, and actions, then the really good stuff can begin. That's where self-limiting beliefs start to fall away, and you realize that the only thing that has ever been holding you back from doing the things that you want to do and being the person that you want to be is you. And that is real power. So that's it for this week. To wrap up this episode, here are a few points to consider about accountability. Number 1, accountability is all about accepting and embracing the concept that all you have direct control over is your words, your actions, and your feelings. Number 2, how you interact with the world around you will directly shape your own world. And number 3, let go of things that are out of your control and instead choose every day to make decisions that are in the best interests of your mental health and well-being, because you and only you are accountable for the outcome of the decisions that you make. As always, I'm going to close out with a quote that I'd like to encourage you to reflect on and consider what it means for you. This week's quote is another anonymous one, and it is, "None of us is responsible for all the things that happen to us, but we are responsible for the way we react to them." Let me repeat that. None of us is responsible for all the things that happen to us, but we are responsible for the way we react to them. Alright, so to summarize, accountability is a choice that we each make to accept that our life is our responsibility. You are accountable for the things that you do and say, and how they affect other people, as well as how they affect yourself. If you choose to put negativity out, then that is what you will be surrounded by. However, if you choose to put out positivity and to reflect positivity in your words, actions, and feelings, you will see more and more good in your life, because you, and only you, are accountable for your life. Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope it gave you some useful, practical advice on the subject of accountability and mental health. If you liked it, please tell someone that you know about it, because word of mouth is a great way to help new people find the show. Next week's episode will be hope. I'll be talking about what hope is, why it's so important for good mental health and well-being, and what to do if you're struggling to maintain or even find hope. I hope you'll join me for that episode, which will be released on Monday morning, Australian time. On Friday, I'll be sending out the next issue of the Mental Health Talk newsletter, which is a weekly roundup of articles and resources that are focused on good mental health and well-being. You can find that and past episodes of Let's Talk About Mental Health at the website, which is letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. That's letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. And you can also sign up there to have new posts delivered to your inbox. Find Let's Talk About Mental Health on social media. I post daily on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest at LTAMHofficial. That's LTAMHofficial. Have an absolutely fantastic week. As always, look after yourself and make a conscious effort to put some kindness out into the world, because what you put out comes back to you. Take care and talk to you next time.